Good evening. Today is October 25th, 2021, and this is the 17th episode of New Paradigms. I'm your host, Sargis Sangari. Today I have a returning guest with me and a dear friend of mine, Richard Goldberg. Richard is a senior advisor at the Foundation of Defense of Democracies. From 2019 to 2020, Richard served as the director for countering Iranian weapons of mass destruction for the White House's National Security Council. As a staff associate for the House Appropriations Subcommittee on State Operations, Richard also worked on the U.S. Foreign assistance, including foreign military financing, international security assistance, international peacekeeping, development, global health, and also economic support funds. He was a founding director of the House U.S.-China Working Group, and also his efforts led to the U.S. Missile Cooperation expansion with Israel, where he played a key role in the funding of the Arrow 3 program, the Iron Dome, and also the development of advanced radars that were used in the Negev Desert. In the Senate, Richard also emerged as a leading architect of the toughest sanctions that were imposed on the Islamic Republic of Iran, where he led the Republicans in three rounds of really targeted operations against SWIFT messaging services and also the Iranian banking, and targeted majority of the Iranian sectors. You could see the work that he has done in the book that looked at the Iran wars. Richard, I know it's been a while since we've actually physically met. You're here in Illinois, but with COVID restrictions, the last time we had a chance to sit together was when we were on the panel discussing the same issues, it seems, that we're discussing today. But before we begin, I do want to talk about what happened late last night, which was with the coup that took place in Sudan. I do know that I know that's not what we're going to be concentrating on today, but I thought it was important to welcome you in, talk a little bit about that, look at what the ties are with what happened with the coup in Sudan and how everything from Afghanistan to what happened with the recent Iranian elections, what is happening in Syria, what has happened in Lebanon with the infighting that is taking place. And I knew you were going to be the key guy to be able to kind of put all this out to our audiences and dissect it and link analyze it for them.
Well, thanks so much for having me. We'll try. We got a lot of continents to cover, but we'll do
it. Well, usually that's the way it works. Unfortunately, the Sudanese military did not consider our program today when they decided to get up and conduct a coup. I recently just came back from the Horn of Africa and East Africa. We were out there conducting a regional assessment. And in that regional assessment, realized that there is a lot of issues that are at play because with what happened in Afghanistan, it actually led to the problems that we are encountering and we have to deal with a lot of those offshoot groups actually filtering, believe it or not, in South Sudan. And while I was there also at the same time, ISIS raid took place in Sudan itself, where 10 of the officers for the Sudanese army were killed with the coup that took place today. I do want to kind of get your take on it. I know that we're looking at the diminishing effects of U.S. foreign policy and also the Near East future over the next decade, which you have written articles on, but want to kind of have your take on what do you think is going to happen in the Horn of Africa and how does that kind of tie into what we're here to talk about today?
Yeah, I mean, on first blush, it's a very depressing moment for the people of Sudan, where we had very high hopes coming out of the coup in 2019 when Bashir was taken out. Obviously, somebody who is on trial, even today, wanted to be turned over to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, for crimes against humanity for the genocide in Darfur. Also wanted for trial, which has already started and in process in Sudan. For the way he came to power originally, some 15, 16 years ago in a coup of his own. And so we had seen in 2019 a lot of hopefulness with Bashir being ousted, the quick formation of a transitional council between the military and the civilian government with the hope of that becoming a fully civilian government and paving the way to free and fair elections in a democratic Sudan. The date for that transition from military civilian sort of co-government to just civilian government was coming very soon, which is what prompted the pressure here and what prompted, unfortunately, the military to intervene and try to take back the government for itself. We don't know what it will mean yet. Obviously, the U.S. Special Envoy Jeff Feltman was actually in Sudan, was meeting with the parties the day before the coup. I'll have a side note there, which is to say that is a very depressing note of the influence of this administration in the region and the ability for this administration to execute and get things done. This was a high priority for the Trump administration. This should have been a high priority for the Biden administration to prevent what we saw just last night. But let's remember what our interests here. Obviously, we care about democracy and human rights. This is a country that's gone through horrible, horrible, horrible things just a decade ago. We also saw in a leader, Bashir, the ability for the Iranians to use Sudan as a transshipment point for their weaponry flow through the region, for their terrorism, not just in Africa, but using that as a hub to transport it from there to other continents. And so we have a lot of security interests in Sudan. We also have great power competition interests in Sudan. This is an area where the Chinese have been trying to gain a foothold for natural resources for a long time. And we don't want to see the Chinese swoop in here to try to have an alignment with a military dictatorship. And so I think we have leverage here. We need to use it. The Sudanese want our support. This military government is going to have to be pressured to come very quickly, first of all, to release the civilian president and his wife and anybody else from the cabinet who may be under house arrest at the moment. Make sure that they are not harmed in any way, that the people who are coming out into the streets to protest what has happened, the people who want a free and fair democratic Sudan, are treated with respect in the streets, and that there is a date set immediately for when we will get back on track to a civilian government and free and fair elections. There's also an interesting sidelight here, which is, remember, Sudan had announced it was going to normalize relations with Israel. It's one of those few countries in the Muslim world that had said they were going to sign up for this. We had not seen progress to date since the Biden administration took office with the Sudan-Israeli normalization efforts. We had heard that there was a possibility the prime minister was going to come to Washington to finalize some of those agreements. There was talk of exchanges between the Sudanese and Israelis that the Israelis were very excited about on the military exchange level. There are some unnamed sources in the press right now out of the new military government saying nothing will change. The military that have taken control want to have relations with Israel, that they were some of the big supporters of driving that normalization. We will wait and see who's really there. One last piece. We did see a failed military coup just a few weeks ago, believed to be supporters of Bashir as his trial and the possibility of him being turned over to The Hague for crimes against humanity had been advancing. We're not sure. I don't think right now, and Sargis, you're closer to the region at the moment, this does not appear to be his supporters who have taken control here, but we need to be wary of that and ensure that we are dialoguing with the military, making sure these are people who are still on track for a pro-Western alignment for the future of Sudan, and really put pressure to make sure we have respect for human rights, respect for a democratic process, and certainly immediately the release of all the civilians that they've taken into custody.
No, I know. Look, as always, when you have bloodshed on the ground, unfortunately, it's hard to kind of, take steps back and try to recover diplomatically from the problems you caused. And also, the African Union automatically is going to go ahead and put sanctions against the Sudanese government. This is just a reality of how the region operates. The problem we have is this: how the region operates. Majority of the changes end up happening with coups. While I was there on the ground, I know that the Wagner group, which is tied to Russia, was starting to move into Mali itself. This is the same organizational structure that attacked our force structures in Syria or tried to attack them, and we were able to kill and destroy as many of them as we could in Syria. The problem is you got Russia and you got China that are eyeing those resources. After what happened to Afghanistan, we knew from our perspective, from the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement, that there's two other locations that are very key to the control and the shaping of what the map of the Near East may look like. And one of them was going to be really northern Iraq. Unfortunately, in the most recent elections in northern Iraq, even the Syrian Christians couldn't get any of the 5 seats that they were supposed to be getting in order to be able to have a say in the current government. Rian Kaldani, who, when the videos are out there as far as the breaching of the outside walls of the U.S. Embassy prior to the previous voters taking a shot and killing Soleimani in the region, and a close friend of Soleimani is right now holding 4 of those seats. And another individual who has taken one of the 5th seat is an individual who's very close to Russia. So the northern Iraq, what we had hoped, it seemed like anything that was tied to the U.S. In the long term was basically given away to the Iranians. So Iran is now in Afghanistan with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and with China having Bagram Airfield. Iran is now definitely able to expand its capabilities in northern Iraq, and with possible future operations even by Turkey in Syria, Iran may give him that backdoor, ensuring that Turkey can conduct its operation freely in Syria without having any type of a movement against its force structures from Iraqi north. So the only other place you have left is what we had looked at was South Sudan, in this case a Christian nation carved out of an Islamic nation, hoping to be able to survive. And what has happened with Sudan itself, it doesn't seem like this young nation might be able to survive, and we don't know what the future of South Sudan is going to be, because its leadership is really not liked even by its military, who, when I was on the ground, was barely getting paid maybe $2.70 USD per month, and they hadn't been paid for a long time. And recently, as of just today, they also said we don't even want to get the payment anymore from the government of Salva Kiir. So if we lose three locations, from my perspective, and I know we've had this discussion, I think that the Near East map will change to a point where I think Israel, just for the sake of survival, has to really kind of fuse the Abraham Accord nations together, possibly counter against the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and China, which has access into the Middle East using Iran. And you might see at least India kind of come into this new fold of the Near East, where you're going to have China, be in charge of the Far East, and Israel trying to hold together what it can, and the new map of the Near East. I don't see U.S. having any type of a ability to affect foreign policy, as you just said. And your foreign minister, for your special envoy is having discussions, and next day there's a coup, or when your CIA director meets with the Taliban, and a day later, less than 24 hours, they're killing Americans in Bagram Airfield with a suicide bombing attack. You really don't have a capability to get anywhere. Your thoughts?
Listen, confidence in the United States is really at an all-time low in this region, and it's an amazing thing to think about. It's funny to me because the critics of the past administration cast the unilateral moves of the president as something that was alienating our allies, was making the United States less influential. All the examples, obviously contrary to that line of attack. We saw the Abraham Accords rise out of that sort of leadership. At the same time, the Abraham Accords rooted itself in many ways in President Barack Obama's decision to go forward with the Iran nuclear deal and signal the abandonment of traditional allies in the Middle East. In many ways, the Abraham Accords was floundering under this administration until now. And I think the terribly mishandled and the horrible strategic decision to withdraw from Afghanistan, along with some of the items you've mentioned, have really shown our allies the staying power of the United States is no longer there in the region. They cannot rely on us as an ally. not to say they can rely on the Russians or they can rely on the Chinese, who obviously are allied with the Islamic Republic of Iran and have their own agenda. And so who do they have in the region? The Arab countries look to Israel, and Israel looks to the Gulf Arabs as well. And so in some ways, the terrible mishandling and malpractice of this administration has probably jump-started the Abraham Accords back into high gear to understand that these parties may yet be alone for some years in the region, with this president looking to perhaps even draw down from Iraq. Obviously, we still have troop contingents at a very strategic location in Syria, at the Al Tanf base. And so if those signals continue and U.S. withdrawals continue from the region, you're right, those parties only have themselves for their strategic defense going forward. I will say it comes at a bizarre time, because we actually had so much momentum on our side in the region coming into this year. The Islamic Republic of Iran, according to the IMF, was down to $4 billion in accessible foreign exchange reserves. Think about that, $4 billion. The only money they had access to in foreign exchange reserves, down from over $120 billion back in 2017. It's unbelievable. Meanwhile, we thought coming into the last administration that Iraq was lost as part of a strategic decision to hand over the Middle East to Iran. And in fact, through very intense diplomacy and work on the ground, we had seen protests against the Islamic Republic breaking out more frequently. And in these elections, the militias controlled by Iran did not do well. They lost many, many seats. And now we still have to wait to see where Muqtada al-Sadr comes down as somebody who obviously has allied with the Islamic Republic in the past to kill Americans during the Iraq War, but has in more recent years turned himself against Iran. And he is obviously came out of this with the most seats and a pretty hostile message towards the Iranians, where he says he does not want a foreign policy controlled by the East or the West, meaning Tehran, get your hands off Iraq, but also the Americans, get your hands off Iraq. So we'll see how the coalition shakes out. If you have the pro-American Kurds with the Sunnis and Sadr, you could have an interesting coalition. If he goes the other way and is manipulated by Tehran, then we could be combined with the U.S. Drawing down from the region, going back to where we were just a few years ago of Iraq being handed over to Tehran.
Well, look, I don't know. I mean, you can only assume, but I don't trust these players at all. I wouldn't be surprised if the talking points are being given to them by the Iranian government, saying, say this, and then let's see how it shapes out as we continue our policy. Look, I don't know. Maybe we'll have a surprise coming out of Iran and an announcement even before the end of this year, which may surprise a lot of Americans, may not surprise us. I know that Israel just recently went ahead and committed 1.5 billion, I think it is, in USD towards really looking at restarting the operations as far as training operations to possibly hit the Iranian sites again. I know they took money also out of the 2022 budget. With that said, I know that I mentioned in the opening remarks that you had been key in the making sure that the Iron Dome was sustainable. And right now we're hearing talks coming out of Washington, D.C. that it's possible that you're going to have an end to funding for the Iron Dome, which I don't know how that's not going to actually push Israel to having to take some action. And maybe I'm wrong. Do you think that some of the folks in Washington are trying to push Israel into making a decision against Iran? This way they can blame all foreign policy mistakes that they've made on the Israelis for having to go against Iran for their own protection?
No, I don't think that's happening. I think it's a more simple explanation, which is there are people who are anti-Semites, unfortunately, who serve in the Congress, and when the push came to shove, 9 to 10 of them, one who voted present but cried on the floor, joining with 9 others voting against arming the Israelis with a defensive weapon system to protect them against terrorist attacks. Something you never thought was possible for that to be controversial. It obviously has a hang-up in the Senate as well, with one Republican senator who wants to attach a pay-for to the bill. He wanted to use money that would have otherwise gone to Afghanistan before the withdrawal to pay for the $1 billion that is being is allocated here. It's a little bit of grandstanding because that money obviously comes from a larger pool and would be paid for from the larger budget. That being said, it does look like the appropriators are going to put it into the new year's fiscal year defense budget. That will be must-pass legislation at some point coming up, and so I do think it will pass the Congress overwhelmingly.
I hope that supplemental addresses whatever are the shortfalls too come next year. When I was down in Kenya, I do know that one of the things we picked up on was the Chinese were having issues economically internally themselves, and our worry is what are they going to do when it comes to Taiwan. And when I had on a previous show, I had Congressman Harada from the Japanese Congress that was on my show. We did talk about the fact that even the Japanese are looking at the Article 9 restrictions that they have because at that time, on the week that he was on the show, Toyota announced that they couldn't even, they had to slow down their manufacturing because a lot of the chip technology is sitting in Taiwan. I did have Jason Ho and Moi Fukada on the show going back months ago, and we started looking at how the TSMC, which is an American registered company that operates out of Taiwan, became that backdoor for the steal of the F-35 technology. And recently, even Congress finally was able to come out and admit to the fact that after we had sat down, been able to pass on some information to them in a meeting here in Chicago, that it was TSMC. Steal of that technology with a backdoor by the Chinese that may have led to the hypersonic missile that the Chinese were testing. Given all this, and I think some people, maybe from the military circles, would say, is it possible that as everything kind of unwinding itself to where U.S. foreign policy is diminishing, and as you even mentioned, there's new allies being formed with Saudi, even the Kurds, but China has a really strong footprint through Iran and others within the region to where even the Mandarin Chinese is not being taught to the Kurds in northern Iraq, where China will try to exert its capabilities there. In 2016, I sat in the National Security Council meeting, and I did say that what are we going to do when the Chinese use the 43 million Christians that they have against our interests in the Middle East, trying to court the Christians of the Middle East that we're not doing anything with. It was dead silence. And I think finally the Pope may have figured it out 3 years later, where he went to China and tried to strike a deal at least to be able to have some kind of a possibility future relationship with the Chinese government that might be very strong in the Middle East region itself. With that said, how are you seeing this? Do you think the only reset U.S. would ever have would be maybe a possible conflict with Taiwan? I know it might be general, but I mean, a lot of people have asked about that, but I would like to get your thoughts on it. How do we recover from this thing that we've been behind for 60 years now when it comes to how China's been countering us, even in the U.S.?
Two comments I'll make. Number one, the impact of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and two, the urge, the sort of monologue that we've heard out of many of the isolationist camps of we need to get out of the Middle East to pivot to China, being something that you in what you've just discussed really upends that thesis. First, on Afghanistan, I think that for many of our allies, and worse for our enemies, watching us pick up sticks and leave precipitously and allow the Taliban to march on Kabul and take down that democratic government, our ally that we had invested so much time, treasure, and blood in, allow Afghanistan to fall to become a terrorist terrorist safe haven once again. Without any fight, without any attempt to save the Kabul government, is really something that if you're in Taipei, you're saying to yourself, oh my gosh. I know that there are people who are ardent Taiwan supporters out there who have studied this issue, and I saw them on their social media feed saying, no, don't say this has any implication for Taiwan and China. This is completely different. Afghanistan was a 20-year-old war. People are tired of it. The president said he was going to get out. And his commitment to Taiwan is firm. Well, let me tell you something. that's a really nice, optimistic way of viewing the situation. But if I was in Beijing, I would not believe that the resolve of the United States to actually militarily defend Taiwan is firm. And so that is something we need to think about as we've seen the escalations from the PLA, their Air Force in recent weeks upticking. We are at a very high level of tension there, I think unprecedented because of American weakness. And any missteps or miscalculation by the president right now could lead us into a conflict, which will have certainly much higher costs and casualties than anything that we saw in Afghanistan. What I'll say on the idea of pivoting to Asia, pivoting to China, that we are caught up in these endless forever wars in the Middle East. We need to just get out of the Middle East so that we can focus on the rising threat of China. That's really sort of an outdated perspective of where China is. China's not just in East Asia. China's everywhere. Yeah. And if you're getting out of everywhere just to focus on East Asia, then China's going to beat you everywhere else. And so if we are leaving Afghanistan, if we are leaving Iraq, if we are going to turn over the Middle East to the Islamic Republic of Iran, who is going to be bringing all the investment into the Islamic Republic of Iran already? Who's striking a 25-year deal with them to invest in their infrastructure? Who wants to have a seaport, perhaps, near the Persian Gulf? Who already is investing heavily in Pakistan and in Africa? It's China. And so it doesn't make any sense to give up our strategic footholds, to give up our strength and influence in these regions and cede them to the People's Republic of China. That is not in our long-term interest. We need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. That is what a superpower does if they want to keep a democratic, liberal-led order in the world.
Oh, look, I was even looking at when General Powell passed away, Secretary Powell, I was looking at some of the comments he made in 2004. And when he was looking at China, he was still looking at it from a region perspective, to where he was looking at Korea, I should say South and North Korea and Japan. But, I wrote a series of articles for Daily Herald here looking at backyard wars. Backyard wars, China sees everything as a backyard. It's no longer that you're looking at those segments. So they're everywhere. And if you do not counter them in what is your backyard, in this case, your backyard is the Middle East, it is Africa, it is South America, you're going to lose. And unfortunately, again, I have a hard time from a realist perspective, and a guy who's fought, for 20 years for this nation, 6 years of continuous combat ops, I've been in diplomatic missions. So how are we going to recover? Because to me, it doesn't seem like it doesn't matter who becomes the next president of the United States, how the parties shift, how the pendulum flows either in 2022 or 2024. If we don't make some serious changes to how we approach foreign policy, I just don't see how we're going to recover from this. I mean, in the past, I used to say that China's up on the hill, they haven't secured it yet. I have a hard time saying that it hasn't been secured yet anymore these days. And I'm not sure if there's an answer to counter it. I mean, look, even what's going to happen once we pull our forces out of Iraq by the end of November, okay, Syria is now left. Well, Syria now becomes detriment to Saudi Arabia, and I don't know if people understand that. If Saudi is going to get squeezed because of the pressures that are going to be placed on it, whether it be from Yemen, as the Iranians are operating there, and what happens in Syria, what happens now to the decisions that Israel has to make in the region to be able to protect itself and bring stability, if possible, of functioning peace? Not to say that it's peace, but some kind of functioning peace in the near future without the U.S. support. How are you seeing the actions of others now in the region, separate from what it might have been when you were in, helping the previous administration as a member of the National Security Council?
Well, the momentum has completely shifted. While we were on the offensive in the region, and I believe that our enemies from Asia to Latin America were all perceiving American power and the ability of the United States to project its power, even in the face of traditional allies not wanting to ruffle feathers, not wanting to go along. The fact that there was a president willing to continue to lead on that, the willingness to use military force as a last resort, but use it to defend U.S. interests, that was something that mattered. The fact that you couldn't always depend exactly on what the president was going to do, it kind of kept you on the tip of your toes of what his decision might be. We had gotten into such a predictability of our commanders in chief, where it was a playbook that all of our enemies could read, and they could simply script us right into weakness. We need that leadership. We need that from the Congress while we await it from the White House. And if we don't have that, we will continue to be on sort of defensive, in retreat in these regions, which means our enemies are on the offensive. And they are working to make sure that they take this time to entrench themselves strategically, build up their resources, build up their military capabilities, in some cases, their sponsorship of terrorism, and surround our allies. And if we are not there, then our allies stand alone. And that will be very dangerous, because in the end, as we learned on 9/11, these things don't stay abroad. These things have a way of finding us back home when we think we've finally left everything overseas and we're back safely on our continent, living our lives, and we forget about what's going on somewhere else in the world. That has costs, and it ends up being far costlier than just having a stable commitment long term in these regions to our allies and to our partners.
Richard, I'm going to concentrate on one last country too, because I don't think we can talk about what is happening in the region foreign policy-wise without really looking at Lebanon. I know we have a special envoy to Lebanon, but frankly, from my perspective, I've been asked multiple times, I've said Lebanon as a country, it doesn't exist. It's Hezbollah. And if Hezbollah wants this, then guess what? The leadership in the country in Lebanon will say what Hezbollah wants. But we still pour money into the so-called Lebanese military force structures, and to the tune of millions. But this money goes in, and you work those dollars. You understand how they work, but it's doing nothing more than just actually enhancing Hezbollah's ability to conduct future operations if it wants against the state of Israel. Why is it that our systems just don't understand this? Or is it that the bureaucracies as State Department just have to create a government, whether it be even the Taliban? And, just so people know, I'm still getting calls at 3:30 in the morning from folks saying, hey, we need to get this guy out of here from Afghanistan. And all I could do is work with my folks and my contacts who try to get those SIVs. And at least, thank God, the State Department for the first time tried to admit that, yes, we may have left more Americans behind than we're admitting to. But why is it that the system just doesn't see it that way? Why is it hard for our politicians of the system to see that Lebanon is just not a country, it's an actual state that is called Hezbollah?
Yeah, first of all, my heart goes out to Lebanese people who, by and large, do not support Hezbollah and are trapped right now in economic fallout because of Hezbollah's rule, and because we, the United States and our allies, have allowed this unraveling of Lebanon to go on for years now, subsidized Hezbollah being put in charge of the country to be able to consolidate its power and control, and not done anything to try to undermine Hezbollah and empower people of Lebanon who would actually rise up and take back their own government from Hezbollah and remove Hezbollah from the scene. What we have now, unfortunately, because of these years, bipartisan failed policies. I indict the Trump administration as much as the Obama administration and the current Biden administration for continuing this aid to a Hezbollah-controlled military and government. It makes zero sense. I completely agree with you. Unfortunately, in the U.S. government, we have clientitis at the Defense Department, people who have worked with the LAF for many years, people who simply have these relationships, and they are not viewing the 30,000-foot strategic implications of this funding, and who people are taking direction from, and what return on investment, if any, the United States is getting for these dollars. And you also have elements of the State Department bureaucracy who fundamentally disagree with the idea that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization and should be shunned. This is the similar ideology to what we have in the Special Envoy for Iran, Rob Malley. Rob Malley has said in the past when it comes to Hezbollah, when it comes to Hamas, that we should be talking to them. We should be working with them. This is a political movement in their view, not a terrorist organization. And so we have a fundamental different view of how we should treat Hezbollah, what Hezbollah is, wholly owned subsidiary of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And thus, unfortunately, when the recommendation papers go up to the president, when the cabinet figures take the recommendations of their experts to the president, you sometimes during the Trump administration certainly had disagreement, but likely during the Biden administration have no disagreement, and that is continue to fund the Lebanese armed forces, continue to fund the United Nations interim forces in Lebanon, which is an even bigger joke, by the way, than the Lebanese armed forces. Peacekeeping operation that we're funding to the tune of billions of dollars to supposedly de-escalate, to allow the Lebanese armed forces to de-arm the Hezbollah forces south of the Litani River, which has never happened. So if you take the money that you are spending, your taxpayer dollars going to the UN and to the LAF, that's a whole lot of money that you probably could have just put into a fireplace and burned and gotten better return on investment.
Okay, look, I knew you were the guy to bring in.
I wanted to cheer you up tonight. I wanted to cheer you up. That, things are looking up.
I got to tell you, I used to have hair before the program began, So, but look, I mean, we're at a point, I guess. I'm a realist. I want us to fight, continue to move forward, but I know that you've looked at where the region's going to be over the next decade. I mean, what's going to happen if tomorrow Iran says we have the bomb? What's going to happen to the region? And I think there's a lot of Americans that don't care in Congress.
That would be a fundamental shift in the balance of power of the region, and that is something that we absolutely cannot allow to happen.
No, we cannot allow it to happen. And I unfortunately, you have people in Congress that don't really care. Look, with that said, I knew you were going to be able to get even the questions I put on, which are multi-layered, and kind of condense them into what needs to be done for viewers to have a takeaway of understanding how all is fitting into each other. So where are we going to be in the next decade? I guess I'm going to give you the last word on this. Where are we going to be in the last decade? Are we going to see a possibility of the U.S. having more diminished ability to affect foreign policy regardless of who is in office in 2024?
Listen, I remain hopeful because I think that generally the American public supports the vision that we're talking about for foreign policy. I believe they want a strong America. I think they want a strong national defense. I think they do want America to have a forceful presence in the world for good. I don't think they want us retreating behind our own borders. I think the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan showed with the backlash of the public. You see the president's numbers now, which have tanked since Afghanistan. Now, obviously, there's a lot of other issues going on in the country, but they really just didn't add up to much until Afghanistan. And people had seen polling saying, get out of endless wars. We don't want forever wars. We want to get out of Afghanistan. And then people saw the result of acting on such folly, and they said, whoa, we didn't want that. We don't want Afghanistan to be a safe haven for terrorists. We don't want that to happen elsewhere. We saw this happen, by the way, in the last decade. Right, we were on the verge of withdrawing from the Middle East, getting out. We're going to pivot to Asia. We got out of Iraq precipitously, and what happened? We got ISIS, and we went back to the region, and we fought, and we defeated ISIS caliphate, at least the physical one in Syria. And we didn't learn from that mistake at all, and we repeated it again. But you know what? Unfortunately, because of what happens when you make these mistakes, the American people say, oh, yeah, we shouldn't do that. Let's do something different. And I think their elected leaders in Congress need to hear their voice. And eventually we will have the right policies, whether it's from the Congress or from a future administration.
No, let's hope. Let's hope it happens. I mean, we got the word that as soon as Afghanistan fell, the day later that ISIS was manifesting itself in northern Iraq. So we believe there might be operations that they're going to conduct by next March. I mean, for God's sakes, they were conducting operations in Sudan when I was on the ground just a couple of weeks ago. So they still have a long reach throughout the entire region. If people want to learn more about what you have written, where can they go? Tell me a little bit about what you're working on and what are some of the future projects you're looking at.
Yeah, I'm spending a lot of my time looking at all the threats coming out from the Islamic Republic of Iran. A lot of what we've talked about today. I'm thinking a lot about what we do now for Afghanistan going forward. I think the decisions we make in the next few weeks and months will determine whether or not we end up having another 9/11, whether we have to go back in sooner than later to Afghanistan. So thinking a lot about those things, thinking a lot about China, its influence on the international stage, the way it's exploiting international organizations, and the way that other actors like Russia, Iran, Syria, North Korea are also trying to exploit those international organizations. You can learn a lot about that work at fdd.org, and follow me on Twitter at Rich_Goldberg.
And I saw we have the Jewish Insider. Tell me a little bit about the Jewish Insider. I have been there. I think it's wonderful work you guys do, but tell me a little bit about it.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm co-hosting a podcast for the Jewish Insider called Limited Liability Podcast. It's available on Apple, Spotify, all of those good platforms. JewishInsider.com. They do really sort of the inside baseball. It's sort of the Politico for the Jewish world. It's a great website to subscribe. They have a daily kickoff that comes in every morning. It's sort of like your political playbook, focusing a lot on Israel, on the Jewish community, Jewish leadership issues. We've had some great guests. We had Secretary Pompeo just a couple weeks ago. We had H.R. McMaster, General McMaster. We have some exciting guests coming up as well. And also Mosaic Magazine, where I have a column. They have some great long-form essays. I did one just a few weeks ago on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, looking at where we were in 1981 in Afghanistan and thinking through all the way to where we might be in 2031 in Afghanistan, the lessons we learned, the lessons we unlearned along the way.
Now, look, I think you do a great job on your podcast, and folks, go there and be subscribers. And the only advice I would give you to make sure it's a very good podcast, just make sure that your internet connection really fails at the beginning of your podcast, and at the end tries to freeze up. Like, we've been having some problems today. I think that's going to really be golden for you. But so be it. These issues always do take place. We have a much better copy of our interview today afterwards. Unfortunately, you always have to have the back door. Look, Richard, it's a blessing to have you. We should have had you on earlier, but you're a busy man, and thank you very much for taking from your time to being here. And let's hope that the region doesn't change and that we do not have a surprise announcement coming out of Iran by the end of the year. I hope it's more of a positive for us in the long run.
Colonel, my friend, it's always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for having me. I have great respect for everything you're working on, and all the best.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. God bless. You're a great man, and keep up the yeoman's work, as we would say. With that said, thank you for joining us today. Please follow Sim Production, which is carrying us. And also at the same time, please, if you like the program we have, you could donate at the Near East or the United Syrian Appeal, and all that support goes to helping the refugee causes for the Christian refugees, both in northern Iraq, and now we're also concentrating on South Sudan. With that said, there's New Paradigms. God bless.